Hello everyone, thank you so much for participating in Beacon Unlimited and specifically for participating in the Summer Art Project. We're so excited to have something in common that we can be doing together and that we can gather together at camp and show and display to show how we were still a Beacon community even when we had to spend the summer apart. So thanks so much for participating. My plan right now is just to go through the instructions that were in the Summer Art Project packet to make sure that it's easy to understand and that your art piece turns out the way that you want. So, just reviewing quickly, in the art packet you would have gotten a little baggie that was full of pieces of yarn, colorful pieces of yarn. The fun thing about those pieces of yarn is that I used the same balls of yarn for everyone's art packet. Now, some of those balls were multicolors, so the color that the yarn ball started with was not the same color throughout the end, so it has a similar pattern but not always the same color. So everyone's different pieces of art will turn out similar because it's similar yarn, but different because of the colors. So it's always good to know that your piece will be unique. And so you also would have noticed that it indicated that there's two different sort of styles of yarn. There's thicker yarn, so it's just this fluffy kind, which I've just generally labeled as thick yarn. And then there's thinner yarn, sort of like this rainbow kind, or this sort of sparkly, it has a silver sparkle thread all throughout it. So there's thinner pieces and thicker pieces. And this just lends different qualities to the art as you weave it. It'll make some sections a little wider and higher, and others lower and more multicolored. Then, of course, you have your CD, and yes, they are actually DVDs because we found a good deal for them, but you haven't gotten the wrong thing. It's all the same to us. Now, as you know, a DVD has got its plain side that has the logo and everything, and then this funkadelic, shimmery side. We are hoping that you're going to use the plainer side as the back of your art piece, because then you can use a Sharpie to write your name on it, so we know who you are and what you contributed to the project. So as we talk in the instructions about front and back, just remember that this side is the back and this side is the front. So my plan is to tilt this camera forward so you can look at my hands doing the project, and then it will help you know what to do yourself. So I'm just going to tilt the camera forward so you can see what I'm working with here. There we go. So the first step in the instructions talks about warping your CD, which literally just means making it into a loom. On a loom, the different threads that people weave in and out of are called the warp threads. So we are going to be making our our CD into a loom as well. So the way that we're going to do that is by taking one of the thin pieces of thread. So you can see here some of my options. I'm choosing a thin one because that makes it easy for my fingers to go over and under them. And I'm going to feed it through the center hole and then tie a knot, nice and tight if I can, right on the cover there. And so this is the start of my warp threads. And I'm going to leave the knot on this side, the back side, so that it won't be obvious in my art piece. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed that thread through the middle hole. It takes a little while to pull all your yarn through at first, but it gets easier and easier as as you use more and more of it. So I pull it all the way through the center of the CD, and this becomes the next warp thread. So I'm pulling it all the way across, and then I'm bringing it back through the middle and pulling it through again, sort of a long pulling process. And I'm going to keep going through the middle and across to make the different warp threads. Now, you'll see that in the instructions, it indicated that two important things. One, that we're aiming to have about 15 to 21 of these different warp threads, because that just makes your art piece, it makes the yarn that you're weaving tighter and therefore looks better, holds together better. So we're going to make 15 to 21 of these different lines that are coming across the DVD. And it says that you need to have an uneven number of warp threads. And this is to keep the under-over pattern working properly. So as you go along, weaving these things over and under through the middle, you're going to keep track of how many you've done. And one way that I've seen that's helpful for keeping track is that people, as they weave, they sort of start grouping together the threads in pairs so they know how many they've done. So 2, 4, 6, 8, just like that. So this is a good way for keeping track of how many you've done, and then you need to have an odd one out to make sure that you've done an uneven number of them. So another important thing to remember is to try to make your threads as tight as possible, not so tight that you're pulling the yarn apart or something like that, because yarn is not as strong as steel, of course, but you're going to keep them tight because that will mean that when you're weaving will just have less floppiness about it. So since this is a demonstration, I'm not going to go to the highest number possible. I'm going to aim to get to 15 threads. So let's count where I'm at. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. That means that I'm going to do one more pair of warp threads. There we go. Here's another pair, 14. And now I'm going to weave through my final one, the 15th one. So now I've got a properly set up CD. It's been the warping is complete. So in order to make this finalize, I'm going to take this to the back and I'm going to tie it to one of the original warp threads again, just so that it has a secure spot. And then once I've done that, I'm just going to cut off any excess thread so that it is not in the way. So here I am just tying it. Of course, when you're doing it on camera, it never works as smoothly as you're hoping, but there we go, tying it in. And I'll do just a double knot because I want it to be secure. And then I'm just going to cut off whatever remains. And then we'll move on to the next step. There we go. So, handy dandy scissors, give it a cut. And there we have it. On the front side, the shiny side, I've got my warp threads. And now I can sort of spread these out because I'm going to use them for the weaving. So they don't need to be all tightly bunched anymore. Because the important thing about weaving is going over, under in a regular pattern, not accidentally skipping any of the threads. So there we have it, a fully warped CD. Now, to prepare for weaving, we're going to choose a thread. It's going to be, the weaving starts at the center and moves out and out and out. So whatever color you choose first is going to be the center color of your weaving. Now, if I had to suggest anything, I would suggest a thicker piece of yarn, like this one, for example, because it will show up better in this smaller space. So to start it off, I'm going to flip to the back side of my little CD loom, and I'm just going to simply tie a knot with the yarn to one of the threads at the back. That's going to be its starting point. And then similar to when we were starting off the warping, I'm just going to feed my thread through the middle, and then that's going to be how I start. So, as I mentioned earlier, the goal is to take the thread and put it over, under as much as we can. So I can choose anywhere I want to start. Maybe I'll start up here. And I'll start by tucking my thread under and pulling it through just for my first little bit there so it's established. And then from here on in, I'm just going to follow a pattern. So this thread I'm going to go under, this thread I'm going to go over, so or opposite. This I'm going to go over and then tuck under that. So usually you can do an over under all in one step because going over doesn't really take any extra work. So this thread is going to be the one I go over, and this one is going to go under. So there's the over, here's the under. Pull it through, and away we go. And it just starts to develop into a really easy rhythm. I'm going to go over, under, and round and round and round she goes, and where she stops nobody knows. And I'm going to go over, under again. Now, you might find, for some of your fingers, going over and under like this is going to be pretty easy. But if you are having trouble pulling your thread through, there's a neat little trick that you can do to make a sort of needle that you can use to thread through the warp threads to go over under. And that's simply by using a bit of tape. So I'm going to take a piece of tape here. It doesn't matter what kind of tape or how long really you make it. You're going to take the end of your thread and you're going to wrap the tape around it. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing. I'm sort of making it long and thin as I'm wrapping it, just letting it wind around and around and around. Doesn't have to be pretty. It's just supposed to be longer and thinner and have a tip that you can find easily. So you can see here, I've sort of just, it's definitely not pretty, but what it allows is this thinner part is easy to put over and under in the thread. So now I can just put over, under, over. I can even do sometimes over, under twice and pull my thread through like that. So you could use that handy dandy little trick if you feel the need to have a needle. And you just have to be careful with a needle that you haven't missed any threads as you go along, because needles are a little bit faster than your fingers, so you don't want to miss something along the way. So again, I'm going to go over, under, over, under. I'm going to try to do it twice. Over, under, and then pull. I wouldn't do more than 2 over unders at a time if I were you, because you wouldn't want things to get tangled by accident. It takes a little longer for it to work through. So pull it through, and as you can see, we're starting to get thicker in the middle. It's starting to weave around and become a pattern. So that's great. and you can follow that pattern all the way to the end. But what I want to just quickly show you now is how to switch yarn when you're ready to switch colors. So if you come to the end of your yarn, I'm just going to do that by snipping this here so I can demonstrate. And you want to start with a new color, such as this rainbow one. All you have to do is tie the two in knots together. I found it helpful when I was practicing it to tie the knot with one side first. So I'm going to tie this rainbow piece in a knot around the blue side. There you go. And now I'm going to tie the blue one in a knot sort of over itself and the rainbow one. And then you can pull to make sure it's holding secure. And then I'm going to trim the little bits that are extra so that they don't get too much in the way of my art. And as I go along, I might want to sort of tuck it underneath the weaving I'm doing. But then it just simply becomes, you would start weaving with the front of the rainbow piece now and go along, and it would work out perfectly. And you could make a new tape needle on the end of this one if you wanted to continue using that style of weaving. So then you keep going round and round and round all the way to the end, and when you finish, all you do is, when you have the end of your thread, you go back to the back of your CD and you tie it to one of these just like you did with your warp thread and your original starting piece, and just tie it to the back so it doesn't show on the front. And in the end, your piece might look something like this. So here's a piece I made a while ago, my thicker piece. You can see this is where I experimented with having a thinner layer on the inside, and it was pretty hard to see. So here's a thicker layer. You can see the multicolors. I went almost to the edge of my CD. You can still see the edges of the warp threads that I have, and it turns out pretty cool, pretty unique. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what your CD weaving pieces look like. And I look forward to putting them up somewhere around camp for us all to be able to look at and appreciate the fact that we were together even when we were apart. So God bless, have fun, and enjoy your art piece.